Welcome back to our podcast, The Doctors Are In. I'm Reverend Dr. Katie Nix, and with me, Reverend Dr. Phil Blackwell. Continuing in our season, talking about the story of the merger. And early on in the merger, we started using this language, the idea of a marriage, right? There are two families coming together. Very important using this imagery of not one group is more important than another, but this is a combining. And so in addition to combining the legal documents, combining staff and congregations and stories, we quickly realized that what could be the make or break point, like it is for all marriages, is when we talk about the first holidays. And anyone who's married knows that first conversation, is it Thanksgiving at your house or is it going to be at my house? And what are we serving? Because our Thanksgiving always has this. And so working through that piece, we knew right away was going to be something very vital on how this is going to, the emotion, the tenor of this merger. And so for this episode, we've invited Mary Edwards and Carrie Sullivan to join us and just start talking about how the heck we did that, and dare I say, did it pretty darn well. So I'm going to start, actually, I want to start a little bit back even before the first holidays together, because we're talking some about, as we were deciding, merging together multiple altars or baptismal fonts or banners, these items that are precious. What went into those conversations, and what do you guys remember about making sure that it felt like one new family, but still honoring the pieces that were important to both? What did that look like?
Well, I think that we had big discussions and walkthroughs. Mm-hmm. We walked through both buildings, looking at what we could bring over, and looked at this building and what we could get rid of in order to bring those things over. Mm-hmm. So we did a variety of things in that respect. And it was communications and talking about what was important to Grace family and what was important to the university family and how we would bring those things together. So I think it was a conversations continual.
And strategic about who was having those, because I know for those who don't know the history of hiding, Carrie has always been my go-to for, hey, we need to make this look nice, whether it is Christmas or Easter. Carrie has always had that eye for the sanctuary. Mary has been intricately involved in worship design, in music, both of those pieces. So in terms of the things that
Physical
matter,
things,
you
yeah.
knew those pieces. And Mary, in terms of, if we don't sing this hymn at Christmas time, someone's going to just blow their stack. You knew that piece as well.
Well, to back up to the items, there was a committee, and I wasn't officially on the committee, but I was invited to it to represent music. At the time, our music director was on sabbatical, so we needed to make decisions. They had a whole church full of things, and like you said, we couldn't bring them all over here. But the very first piece was finding out from the people at university what the most important things to them were. And there was a committee that worked that out. You'll hear in other episodes the importance of the banners to universities. So that was one priority right there. And
will you say a little more about the banners? Because I think that is such an integral piece when we were talking about this.
Well, at university, there were a set of banners that were hung over the choir loft in their sanctuary. And their sanctuary was a much different configuration than ours. But a church member had handmade this whole set of banners for the church year. And in fact, they have a whole book of explaining the significance of all the artwork that was used and what that was. And it's all spelled out what date, we get to Pentecost, you put these on. At Advent, you put those on. And so we knew right up front that the banners had to come, and we needed to find a way because we couldn't hang them in our sanctuary. And very ingeniously, they found a way to stand them up by getting very heavy stands. And then it's still a very important part of the church to make sure that we have those banners up on the right Sunday. Once they figured out the things that were very important for university to bring over, then we went over and looked around to see what we might find useful at Grace and what we would have room for. And one part that I played was the music director did come back from sabbatical long enough to go over there. They had a number of very nice pianos, so we didn't want to just leave those sitting if they could be usable. So that was one thing.
I remember you going over there playing every piano
Played
and
every
saying,
piano. And there's one that's not very good looking, but that's the one they used for their choir rehearsals, and they called it the War Horse, and we found a place to put it, and a reason, but we had to have a reason for it.
Right.
And then they've actually come in very handy on occasions. We brought the piano that was in the sanctuary from university and put it in our choir room because it was much better than what we had. And when we had to send ours out for several months for work, well, then that became the sanctuary piano, and it was a very good piano. But we have a piano in almost every place that somebody would want to, and including in the chapel. We didn't have one in the chapel, and when we had a little flood in the chapel and the 8:30 service had to move to the parlor, voila, we had a
there was
piano.
a piano there, yes, yeah.
So that's just one little example. But I think the philosophy through the whole thing was to find out from these people what was important. And I told anybody over there that I met that I said, I just feel so much for you because I know how I would feel if Grace Church was the one that was moving. And we tried every way we could to make them feel comfortable.
So that leads up great. So we merged right around the end of June, if I'm correct. And we're going to there's a whole episode we'll talk about what that final service was like, starting at one church and decommissioning it, saying goodbye, having everyone drive the mile down the road and having the service finish at Grace Church and celebrating that. We go into kind of a quiet season with the summer, but then right off the bat, what we didn't think was a big deal quickly became, and that was All Saints Sunday. And that's kind of when I think the first time the rubber hit the road, that they had traditions that we didn't know about. And even the other difficulty of this is we were just coming out of COVID as well. So the idea of being together in a physical space for worship, as well as I had been at the church 8 months before we shut down. So in many ways, you're working with kind of a new pastor. I had not done an Easter service together or things like that. So let's talk about the first hiccup that actually worked out pretty well. Yeah.
I think that it worked out very well because there were people in the sanctuary very much grieving because we had not been allowed to grieve together. So we were looking forward to, if that's the right word, but we were certainly,
this All
All
Saints
Saints
was
was
different.
going to be very important because we had several people who had passed away during the COVID times, and we had not been able to celebrate their lives.
Right.
And you're right, both churches had we're very similar activities, but they still weren't the exact same. And I think that you and Tina came up with the idea of doing the Day of the Dead. And that's how we progressed with that, so that it was something that neither church had done before.
Right.
So it was new. And there was nothing like, oh, that's not how we did it before. So there was a planning committee. Mary and I were both on that planning committee that we planned for how we might do this. There were also people on the committee who had had losses recently, and they were not ready to give up the tradition that had been going on at university.
What was that tradition?
They had a bell tree. We also had bell trees, but we hadn't used them for maybe 4 or 5 years, so they weren't as important to our congregation, where we put a bell up for each person that had passed. And they had one. It was small, and they had these bells on it, and they would be processed in with the bells on that day. I don't think they did bagpipes or anything, did they, Mary?
No.
Which is something we had done in the past. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't an issue. So we planned the Day of the Dead type of thing and had big displays with the people who were missing and the new saints, and they were all up there. But they also wanted these bells. So we incorporated it at the beginning of the service.
And I remember it was kind of a little bit of a last minute plan, but when we realized and they said,
How important it was.
we said, then we make it work.
We made it work.
Right.
Yeah, I think it literally was the week, the final planning session,
Yes.
the week of All Saints Day, which happened to fall on Halloween that day.
It wasn't exactly.
October 31st.
Yes.
So when we realized that it was so important to them, we just found a place to add it to the service. And I think Carrie and I, we've talked. I think we agreed that it didn't take away from the other service because that was all based on. We didn't sing for all the saints. It was all around this Day of the Dead.
The Dia de
I've
los
practiced
Muertos,
this
yeah.
Dia de los Muertos.
Yes.
And part of that was people could bring anything they wanted and put on the altar. And my niece put her brother's favorite candy bar on. I just thought that was one really poignant thing.
Yeah, so we made these kind of like a giant ofrenda. And same thing for my kids. Grandpa had passed away. And so they went and put Taco Bell on the altar because when you went to visit Grandpa, it was 2 crunchy tacos and the diet soda. And so I liked that. It was something neither church had done.
Right.
But really lived into, we could identify there was this huge opportunity to express grief for so many people in so many different ways and to really lean into that and honor that.
And there was one other little element of it. It had been very important at university that on the Sunday closest to Halloween that the children would collect for UNICEF.
That's right, yes.
And their tradition was to have the children come in their Halloween costumes and then during the children's time run around and collect change. And everybody agreed that because of the tenor of this Day of the Dead service that they do away with the costumes, but they found a way for the children to still collect for UNICEF, and we've continued that tradition.
I hear you over here. You've
Yeah,
got a
no,
thought.
I
It's
just-
going to be great.
No, just wondering, so you get to Christmas Eve.
Because as you know, as a pastor, you can do anything you want on Christmas Eve, right? But it'll be the last Christmas Eve you ever do because
Well, I was just curious, how do you talk about Christmas Eve? How did you talk about it? How did you schedule things? What times are the services? And, what did you end up doing?
A big tradition at Grace for years, well, decades, since I was a little, even before I was a little kid, was that we do the Festival of Lessons and Carols, not on Christmas Eve, but on the third Sunday in Advent. Well, we'd had a very unfortunate circumstance during this time right after the merger that our music director first was on sabbatical and then resigned. So we had an interim music director, and it was kind of late in the game to start planning Lessons and Carols. And this had been, kind of a question before, well, is this something that we should continue doing? Because it's a big deal for Grace, but maybe the people at university wouldn't buy into it. I remember going to Pastor Katie and I said, can we try it once? And to go back even further, for a long time we have been thinking about intentionally what we do, and is there a reason to do it, or is it just one of these things we do it because we've always done it? And most of us who've been involved with this, and even people who've just been in the congregation for years and years, we thought the answer was yes, and we wanted to share this experience with our new friends, and if it turned out that they didn't think it was a good idea, we would change it. Well, the unfortunate circumstances, besides the fact of getting a late start to get in an interim music director, our organist had a series of mishaps, so right at the time when it was crucial to start planning this, she fractured her pelvis, I think, and was out. So he was scrambling just to get an organist every Sunday, and have somebody because she was going to be out clear through the Christmas season. So we finally had to realize that it just was not practical, that we were not going to do this year. And so then we decided to put all of our efforts into Christmas Eve and make it, add a lot more music. But when we started planning for Christmas Eve, Pastor Katie called a meeting with people from both and said, okay, what's important? And one thing was very easy because both churches had a tradition that we end the service with Silent Night with candles.
So luckily, we dodged the biggest bullet there because everyone already had, this is how we do Silent Night and this is where we do it. And I went, okay, we're going to survive this. But you remember that meeting too, right?
I was at that meeting also, yes.
Yeah.
And then someone from university said, Doug Durham has to sing Mary Did You Know? Mm-hmm. And there's a little cross-pollination there because the Durham family was, half of the Durham family went to university and the other half were members here. They all grew up here, but at some point.
And if I remember the first Sunday after the merger, it was a quieter Sunday, early in July, the Durham family put flowers on the altar in honor of the family being reunited. We had all these little things to just kind of celebrate what we could at every opportunity.
I had worshiped at university several times because going to baptisms and weddings and things. So when this whole thing started, I kept saying, I think you're going to find that we're fairly like-minded. It's not going to be all the same. And then the other part is that Becca Gus wanted to sing "Oh Holy Night," and also we'd gone back and forth between having one service and two services, and so when you have two services and the choir only sings at one of them, and half the choir wanted to go to the early service, music was not such an essential part, other than the choir would sing an anthem and we would. We sang congregational carols, but this time he pulled out all the stops and we had a professional brass quartet and timpani, and we were able to incorporate something that was important from Lessons and Carols, which was the O Come All You Faithful processional and the David Wilcox version, and we got the brass music, and so it was organ, brass, and timpani, and it was musically wonderful.
Remember, that was kind of the tenor of when we had that planning, saying, okay, this is our first Christmas together, and we want to make this feel extra special. So not only was there this question of how do we make sure everyone feels like, yes, I had my Christmas, but also but we're going to do this, do it big and do it right. And I think that kind of followed the whole Christmas season, I think, for that, is to make sure that we would really make it, because we knew this was going to be the big make or break, because at that point we had been together about 4 months, and I think it was kind of the last thing for a lot of people who had come over from university, well, if I like Christmas here, then I'm going to stay, right? And recognizing how important those pieces are for a congregation's story and history. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. And even in decorating the sanctuary, we looked at that. What did we brought up, of course, we did have the banners for Advent, and then we had the ones that for after Advent,
Didn't you
too.
change the colors as well? Because their banners were blue. Is that when we made the switch to having more of the blue?
We had been leaning and moving more blue in.
Okay.
And getting rid of more of the purple, yes, we moved more into the more blue to make the sanctuary more cohesive in respect to that. I don't think we did the bell tables yet. We, ended up, because when we combined these two churches, our bells got lots bigger.
Yep.
We had lots more bells available. Mm-hmm. So we had to expand those tables out in the sanctuary also so that we could accommodate all of the bells. They didn't have a lot more than the banners that they put up in their sanctuary, so they were very helpful in decorating. That we met on. It was the first time that since I'd been doing it that we opened up and started on the Monday after Thanksgiving. We had a dinner, and then we had a lot bigger group helping to decorate and hanging the stuff up. But yes, I think that's when we did add more blue to complement those.
And there's one service on Christmas Eve, or that Christmas
Two.
Eve? What are the times of it?
One's at 4:30.
4 o'clock.
I think that was the year, because we were, again, coming out of COVID, and so we said, okay, we're going to do one earlier, around 4 o'clock for families who have kids already in bed, or especially some of our older members who said, I don't want to drive don't want to drive in the dark. So we had an earlier service, and then we had the 8 o'clock service.
Right.
And if I remember, that was the first year, the 4 o'clock, we really made it a family feel. I didn't quite have a sermon, but it was a longer children's message. And the feedback we got was, no, I want it to feel like a Christmas service. So now they're almost identical services together. It's just the 4 o'clock, we have more of our battery lit candles because we have more toddlers running around that should not have fire.
But we kind of set the stage even before the merger and before the pandemic, because university had a 4 o'clock family service, and we advertised,
That's
even
right.
though I couldn't call it exactly a joint service,
I went over to university for the family at 4.
because that's back when we were still doing 7 and 11. So therefore, after the pandemic, then it seemed perfectly normal, because they were used to having a 4 o'clock.
And then we had a later one. And then I know some people still miss the 11 p.m. service. But I think what really, for me, what made it work so well is that there was such an awareness from the people from Legacy Grace that how much university had said goodbye to, how hard this first, and such, I say not over the top, but like an extra energy and push to say, what do we need to do to make this feel special for you? To the point that there were, I think, some traditions or some things that I thought, and I'm sure you've had this in some churches, like, oh, we will always have this, or we will always do this. And the willingness from Grace's side to say, this is why this is important to us, but we know what's more important is that we feel like this is our Christmas together in the family. And that set a tone. Because we didn't have any.
That's right.
We didn't have any fighting. I didn't get any angry emails at all.
None.
And I was almost shocked when Mike Engelhardt, our interim music director, asked how many people would come and sing at an 8 o'clock service, and we had and it was amazing. There are a few who were out of town, but other than that, we had a loft full of people.
Yeah. And, Carrie was going to tell us something.
I think that's true because the choirs merged so easily. They merged almost from the very beginning, that they were comfortable with each other. And even though we didn't have a full-time music director at that time, that I think that they just merged personally, and they became the first group that merged well.
One small reason for that was the choir, clear through the pandemic, we did a Zoom meeting at choir rehearsal time on Thursday night, and as soon as the process towards the merger happened, we invited anyone from university to participate in that, and it wasn't a whole lot of them, but over the time, quite a few people had been in on that, so we'd gotten to know each other. And there was one little issue that we knew was going to be a problem eventually, because their choir had gotten rather small, and one of the issues was that spouses didn't want their other spouse spending the entire service in the choir loft. So they didn't wear robes, and they would just walk up and sing the anthem and come back. Well, by the time we merged, we were streaming our service, and we needed people in the choir loft for the
Visual.
Yeah.
for the longest time. In fact, somebody said, I can't sing in the choir because my wife won't let me. And so I said, you're welcome to leave, to stay for the anthem. After the anthem, you're welcome to leave. And so several people, both
Even
Grace
to this
and
day now.
and university, do that, because we had a tradition. It depended on which pastor we had, that we would always leave after the anthem and be in the pews for the sermon. But they grumbled just a little bit about wearing choir robes, but nobody, they showed up to get fitted, and and then in the summer we were more casual and we don't wear the robes, so we kind of have a compromise.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, by the time you got to Holy Week and Easter in that first year, was that easier than Christmas? Had you worked out how to talk about these things?
I wasn't in St. Louis during that time, that first Easter that you did together.
Well, I went back. I pulled up the service, and with my recollection, it just went because I mean, and many times I had seen their Easter services because I'm part of the extended Durham family, and so they would bring their bulletin, and we would compare bulletins.
You know what I remember? I do remember going into that, how important it was, the tradition of the noisy parade at the beginning of the service, which
That was for Palm Sunday.
that's a so Palm Sunday, they had a really important, and again, because we knew to say ahead of time, even in our worship design and as we're planning, okay, what do we need to make sure is important, and to have those pieces. But I think Easter sets a different tone than Christmas. And Easter is, if we've got the good music, we've got the Easter story, it doesn't seem as sacred cow as a Christmas service could
And
be.
I think so. By the calendar, we had meshed pretty easily.
That was
at
almost
that
a year
point.
into it, yeah.
We knew it was happening for a year, even if it hadn't
Yeah.
physically happened. So I think that both sides were more willing to compromise at that point.
We had two traditions, I won't say set in stone, but the opening hymn is always Christ the Lord is risen today, but that's probably fairly universal among
I think
any church.
every church I've worked at, that's always your opening hymn on Easter. Yeah.
And then over time, for the last 10 years at least, we'd sing the Hallelujah chorus at the end of the service and invite anyone from the congregation to come up and sing. And I don't know, I can't remember if they had ever done that, but they bought right into it. And there were people from both traditions coming up to sing along.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're very similar, the people at both of these churches. I
think that helps.
We weren't mixing apples and oranges. We were really very similar. They had the unfortunate piece of having to lose a building, but we were still all church. And I think that meshed us to easy into that. And you were very conscientious about, like, if there was a committee, we made sure there were people from both groups.
Right.
So that helped to mesh us from the very beginning. And I think that helped.
Yeah.
And when we finally did get to do lessons and carols the next year, I'm the one who recruits readers, and I made absolutely sure that we had an equal number of Legacy University people and Grace people. And by this year, it was to the fact that we had several people who have joined since then, so it's getting to be less. I still try to, make sure I get both sides, but it doesn't seem to be, such a big deal anymore.
So I think this is a great spot to kind of wrap up this episode. And let me end with this question, which I've been asking every group that we've been with. If you had the opportunity to give either a piece of advice or just, hey, this is what worked really well to a church in this situation. If you had a chance to talk with the people who are involved with worship, designing the sanctuary for these first holidays, what advice would you give them having gone through this? What do you think was the secret to the sauce?
I would say talk, communications, ask. Don't assume anything, ask. Because people will tell you how they feel.
No, we learned that in every church setting. They'll tell you. They'll tell you whether you want to.
I say communication and talking is the most important piece to me.
I agree with Carrie, and I'd add to that having empathy for these people, because I tried to put myself in their place as I was walking around. I would tell anybody that I had a one-on-one with that we really feel for you, and we know how we would feel. And then the other part was, besides listening, is to make sure that you actually carried out what you heard, that to try to ascertain what was really important and then take that seriously.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much for joining us on this episode. And I'm happy to say that whatever holiday is coming up next, I've got the best group here. Yeah, you can be jealous. Like, we've got a great group of people who make every holiday season here at the church special and holy and beautiful. So thank you both for all that you do for that. And we look forward to seeing you at our next episode.